Guys, as much as I might not be able to understand the plight of the Afrikaners who this newscaster argues that up to 8,000 who actually applied to, go for refugee status in the US.
The New York Times is reporting that the first group of about 100 white South Africans are expected to arrive in the country out of 8,000 or so applications.
I would really wish, this is just me now, an outsider speaking. I would really wish that, we could have, all the races in South Africa work together to build a great South Africa that will be proud of as a part of, Africa. Because the whole thing with, if these 8,000 Afrikaners leave, and these are not just the old Afrikaners who might not be, in the words of, I heard it's economically productive. These are now economically productive Afrikaners who are leaving the country. Bro, whether you like it or not, anyway, it's a huge loss. Although many of the Afrikaners, from their own perspective, would argue that they've been oppressed by the 124 race laws. I'm yet to do a research on that, and that they have not actually been able to, ascertain or exert their most profound fecundity in South Africa. And so probably the US might be the place, the locus, because, like I usually cite the Senegalese academic who I love so much, who wrote a book called Afrotopia. His name is Felwine Sarr. He argues that Africans should always try to find their locus of their most profound fecundity. In other words, there's a certain location in this whole world, it might not be in Africa, where you have your most profound fecundity, and from there you critique or analyze the world. So I think this might be one way to argue for the Afrikaners, for their push to get this refugee status. But anyway, it's been now going haywire, both in the US, in South Africa, all parts of Africa, that, on Monday, I'm making this video now on the 10th of May, which is a Saturday, 2 days from now, America, the United States, would welcome the first 100 Afrikaners who actually have been argued to be part of it, and Afrikaners, 8,000 Afrikaner applications for refugee status in the US. Bro, that's a huge number. And Donald Trump is actually really bullish on this one. I was listening to an SABC international correspondent. Her name is Sophie Mokoena. She's been arguing about how Trump is a little bit uneasy to understand, because as though although he's transactional in his approach to foreign relationships, he's not usually most times stable in decision making, and so it's difficult. But she argues that because of the fact that Trump is transactional, all right, this is how, if I'm hearing her correctly, this move, this refugee move, might actually be also another transactional move, in that light. And so while the skills and the talents, bro, I've really spoken to some Afrikaners, and I really respect these guys. Racial differences, the pains of the past and all that. Sometimes I just wish that God could just take it all away and let's have a productive South Africa, because you can't match the excellence that these Afrikaners, you see. When I look at the much discussed Orania, for example, I know it's a really sensitive one, but bro, those guys, they have something that, we as Black people could learn from, or Africa in general could learn from, all right? But to have to lose a lot of these Afrikaners to the US, and especially most of them are skilled in farming, to strengthen Trump's policy. We know that Trump now, the whole thing with the entrepreneurial prowess of the US is actually one of the policies at the forefront of the Trump administration. I can already see the contribution of these Afrikaners, if they are really, if their skills are utilized. I can already see the power they can pump into the US economy, and that's quite unfortunate, owing to the fact that this is actually a big loss from the African continent, although the whole thing around the narratives of loss is shrouded in a really problematic history. Really unfortunate, guys. But anyway, let's just quickly now listen to this American, I think his name is Stephen Miller. I think he's the rep anyway in charge of this whole angle, this whole thing about negotiating about this whole Afrikaners. And he's actually breaking down and giving the perspective that the US government, Donald Trump's regime, still articulates this problem about the Afrikaner refugees, being oppressed in South Africa. Let's just quickly listen to him describe how, the US is planning to still welcome more than even this first 100 that would arrive the US as US refugees. And I'll be back for further analysis.
Well, because what's happening in South Africa fits the textbook definition of why the refugee program was created. This is persecution based on a protected characteristic, in this case, race. So this is race-based persecution. The refugee program is not intended as a solution for global poverty, and historically it has been used that way. Wherever there's global poverty or wherever there's dysfunctional governments, then the U.S. refugee program comes in, swoops people up, relocates them to America, and you have multi-generational problems. You even into the second and third generation, you have endemic poverty, you have crime issues, you have integration issues. The U.S. refugee program in America has been a catastrophic failure. I mean, if you look, for example, at the Twin Cities area, I mean, just in terms of markers of educational outcomes, in terms of public safety, in terms of welfare use, I mean, it's been a complete public policy failure. And so this is an example of the president returning the refugee program to what it was intended to be used as. Hold on, over there, thanks.
Evidence do you
Well,
have
so
that
let me just take this one first. Yes.
What specific evidence the United States have that those South Africans have been severely persecuted?
Well, but it's state policy. There's land expropriation. There's a whole series of government laws and policies that specifically target white farmers and the white population in South Africa. That's well documented on video. And of course, you even see government leaders chanting racial epithets and espousing racial violence. So it's all very well documented. Yes.
On Ukraine. President Trump and your administration, what is the status of their litigation on the tariff issues and all the issues?
I don't have an update on that. Sorry. Yes. Yes.
Do you have, of the South African refugees, how many are coming and when will they arrive?
Well, we just have the first flight is scheduled, I believe, for early next week. But that's just.
Where in the U.S. are they right now?
Well, I don't have an exact update for you on that yet. I don't want to confirm any news reports, but that's just the beginning of what's going to be a much larger scale relocation effort. And so those numbers are going to increase, obviously, as time goes on. It takes a little while to set up the systems and processes and procedures to begin a new refugee flow, but we expect that the pace will increase. It'll increase at a healthy pace as time goes on. Yes, back there.
How many on the first flight?
Not right now.
Yeah, so you heard it for yourselves, guys, and that's actually what it is. And Sophie Mokoena, in an analysis I was listening to her, she actually was breaking down, there was something about President Ramaphosa having a phone call with Donald Trump, I think maybe last 2 weeks or so, and it felt as though things were getting really better, in the whole US-SA relationship. But man, this decision now and this bullish move by the US actually now shows how low the US-SA relationship has actually really gone. And so this commentator here, I think, is actually breaking down some issues about, the problem with what would happen when they decide to visit their relatives. This is Sophie Mokoena now. What would happen when let's just quickly listen to what Sophie Mokoena argues in the problem she sees about these refugees, because being a refugee means that, I think you are declared not to have a citizenry or a legal citizenry, all right? And this is all funny for me because it comes in the wake of the DA's victory for the Citizenship Act, where it's argued that 2 million South Africans who are actually stuck abroad can now still retain their South African citizenship. What happens now to these Afrikaners, for example? Would they still be able to maintain their citizenship in South Africa? So Sophie Mokoena is actually raising some really important problems she sees about what if they decide to visit their relatives in the future. Would they be allowed to get into South Africa and all of that, since they now will get refugee status in the US? Let's quickly listen to Sophie analyze some of these complexities around this problem.
But as you heard earlier on, in terms of the New York Times that has got documents, it's almost a number of those South Africans, and they are expected to arrive in Washington on Monday. If they will be arriving in Washington on Monday, I think they will be leaving South Africa, if they are flying direct to the United States of America on Sunday, we are going to try and track down Solidarity, including the AfriForum, the two organizations that went to the United States of America and make these allegations, and now Trump responding to those allegations. But what is of concern, I think, is that when you apply for refugee status, you are saying you are not going to go back to your country because of the war, violence, persecution. Now, the question is, will they not, at some point in time, want to come back to their relatives? Because some people are saying, you'll find that it's people with qualifications who are much younger, who can still make a better life in America. But the senior Afrikaner citizens, whites, let us be clear, those who are in South Africa, many of them are saying they are not going anywhere, they are staying here in South Africa. And therefore it will be interesting when they arrive in the United States of America. Our team in New York and also in Washington will be there to take the story forward.
Absolutely, Sophie, and one wonders about the actual sum of the numbers that will be, of course, relocating to the United States by next week. As we understand from our report there, Nick Harper, he says about 100 at this stage is expected to touch down in U.S. soil next week. But any word at this stage then from the South African government? What are they saying?
We haven't had a statement or reaction from the South African government. We'll try and get hold of the international relations spokesperson to check whether they are aware. And also, I think of interest will be whether these Afrikaners, white Afrikaners, will be going to the United States of America. Have they made arrangements on arrival in terms of where they will be staying? Because when you are a refugee, you normally stay in a camp, according to the United Nations Charter on issues that are related to refugees, asylum seekers.
Yeah, so you've heard it for yourself, guys. And so it's just really interesting anyway that, I now stumbled on this news by the Reuters, which gives details now on how this whole thing is going to be going down. So the news says the first white South Africans to arrive under U.S. refugee plan as soon as next week, all right? It reads saying that the U.S. President Donald Trump's administration is aiming to bring the first group of white South Africans to the United States via its refugee program as soon as next week. 3 people familiar with the matter said a divisive effort given that they actually said, yes, they said a divisive effort given by Trump has been blocking refugee admissions from the rest of the world. Now the Trump administration aims to fly the initial cohort of about 50 Afrikaners into Washington Dulles International Airport in Virginia. 2 of the people said, requesting anonymity to share internal plans. The group would participate in a press conference, and I will be really analyzing that press conference on this channel when they arrive the US, and then they will board flights to their US destination. So in other words, I think they're going to be arriving in Virginia, the Washington Dulles International Airport in Virginia, and then from there they will now go to various US destinations. It says that the sources cautioned that their arrival had already been delayed a week and that the plans could change. And as of Thursday afternoon, a charter plane intended to ferry them to the US had not secured a landing permit. I think this would have been a landing permit in South Africa. So now it says that the US State Department, which administers the resettlement of South Africans whom the Trump administration granted refugee status, did not immediately respond to a request for a comment. This is now Reuters reporting. It says that, Trump kicked off a wide-ranging immigration crackdown after taking office in January, including an indefinite suspension of refugee settlement. In a related executive order, the Republican president said that the U.S. would only admit refugees who can fully and appropriately assimilate, all right? And we know Trump is transactional. You see, I'm sure these Afrikaners have a lot of skills, maybe farming or other skills which will really impact the South African economy, rather than, I'm sure this is in Trump's perspective, rather than probably refugees from the Congo war and all of that, because this has been said a lot of times, that how is it that the Trump administration can actually fast track the refugee application, time, which I think lasts about 1 year, thereabout, to only 3 months for the Afrikaners. So there's a really burgeoning argument that, there might be some form of favoritism. But anyway, that's story for other days. So this report now says that despite the broad refugee freeze, Trump in January called on the US to prioritize, this is the word, prioritize resettling Afrikaners, Afrikaner descendants from mostly Dutch early settlers, saying they were victims of unjust racial discrimination. The news says that the assertion that minority white South Africans face discrimination from the black majority has spread in far-right circles for years, and it has been echoed by Trump's white South African-born ally, Elon Musk. It says that the average white household in South Africa owns 20 times the wealth of the average black household, according to the Review of Political Economy, which is an international academic journal. In interviews with US immigration officers, white South Africans seeking refugee status have highlighted troubles with land disputes, crime, and perceived racism, which Reuters reported in April. It says that the South African government has criticized the Trump effort, saying it fails to recognize the country's history of colonialism and apartheid. It says that this is now South Africa's Foreign Affairs Ministry. I think this will now be maybe Ronald Lamola or whatever. But it says that South Africa's Foreign Affairs Ministry said in a statement on Friday that it is most regrettable that it appears that the resettlement of South Africans to the United States under the guise of being refugees is entirely politically motivated and designed to question South Africa's constitutional democracy. There's a top White House official, his name is Stephen Miller, and he says that, I think, is this not the guy? Yeah, this is the guy I played in first. So he's a top White House official anyway. And it says that he's the architect of Trump's immigration agenda. He defended the program while speaking to reporters, saying the situation fits the textbook definition of race-based persecution. You could hear that in the video I played earlier. While some Afrikaners have expressed interest in moving to politically conservative US states, Democratic-leaning Minnesota has emerged as a popular choice, which two of the sources told Reuters. But anyway, yeah, so these are actually what's going on. This is actually what's going on right now with all this whole thing. On Monday, I'll be briefing you guys a little bit more on how these Afrikaners would be faring, their settlement, their press conference with Donald Trump, and we'll hear what they have to say about, the oppression in South Africa and all of that. Although there's been a professor that was really interviewed in DW, and he really criticized these Afrikaners, arguing that, the whole argument that Afrikaners are being, marginalized or oppressed in South Africa is actually something from fiction. It's fictional. All right. So I don't know. I think that professor's name. Yeah. So his name is Professor. He was interviewed by the DW anyway. But these are all the issues going on. And for me, generally, I think, the loss of the Afrikaners, these Afrikaners in South Africa is a big loss. I know the whole thing is shrouded in a colonial apartheid history narrative. I really wish that there would have been a way to work out their differences in South Africa and really lead to a burgeoning economy. But, I've always known anyway that the large number of poor blacks, maybe coloreds, would always be a problem. And, the whole response by the whites now in South Africa to respond in forms of security, more security, the fact that the whites in South Africa are really skilled in starting businesses and all of that, I always knew that whole thing would be a problem. And if the solution to this problem now would now be a lot of these Afrikaners or maybe whites really seeking refugee status or emigrating out of South Africa and leaving behind a bunch of a large number of really unemployed, unskilled blacks and coloreds, maybe, and Indians, without a right government policy to skill this critical mass, bro, man, I really don't know what else to say. I don't know how to envision the future of South Africa, except probably some of the elite blacks would have to now stand up and really start thinking about scenarios that would help propel South Africa's future in a really strategic light. But anyway, these are updates. I'll be updating you guys further. But share your thoughts. What do you think about this move by the US government under Donald Trump? Share your thoughts in the comments.